In part one of this project, I showed how I go about changing these staves that have their arc shapes, turn them into the rough-sized rectangular lumber that's going to be used, the 3/8 thick material, by making these parallel lines here that surround the final shape. And then I have the 3/8. Then I can take information from this drawing then to the shop and create the final, glue up the rough stave and cut the proper angles and glue them up, and then final shaping. So you can see the rectangular shape here, but I want to create the information needed in the shop at this stage. So let me just go back to this first stave, the left number 1, and pull it up to the height, its final height. And then I'm going to copy that component over to the right and do some more work on it to get it into a position where I can dimension and provide drawings for the shop. So the first thing I see is an extra edge here, extra line that I can soften just with the eraser and the control key. But notice that the stave is not lined up with the axes in SketchUp, the red, blue, green. So the first thing I'm going to do is rotate this so that the face of it does line up with the red axis. So I've rotated it and I can see the indication that now it's on the red axis. And then I'm going to change the axes. Well, let me do that again. Right click, change axes. There are the axes that I want the component now to line up with the red and green of SketchUp. So there, now the boundary of the component lines up with the normal axes in SketchUp. That makes it a lot easier to dimension and create templates and so on. So now I can dimension that component, its length, its full width. Oh, I'm showing 64ths, which I don't need that kind of precision here, so I'm going to change that in the units here to a 32nd. I usually work with a 32nd precision on these dimensions. So now it's a 2 1/4 wide stave, and it's 3/8 inch thick. So this is what I can now cut in the shop, but I need the angle information. So the best way to get that is to look at this in a parallel projection, top view. So in this top view, I can also show the dimensions Actually, I should show the overall length of that as well, which is more than 2 3/4. But first, I need to change some layers, add some layers, add a layer for the top view, and also add a layer for the perspective view, because then I can have these dimensions relate to those two views and not interfere with one another. So I can now also find the angle with the protractor. It's 112 degrees, so I can bring out a label that shows the angle there. Now, I want to relate these dimensions here and labels. Select them all, the ones I just added there in the top view, and then change it to the top layer, and then update the scene, or make the scene. This is the Stave L1, number 1, and it's the template. And I can update that scene, and now those dimensions will show up in that scene only, not the perspective dimensions. If I go back to the perspective view, and I need to make the scene for the perspective view, and you can see that those, so I'll make the perspective view here, Stave L1, number 1, and I need to set the layers, turn off the top layers, so now those dimensions go away, and only the perspective layers will show this perspective dimensions. And I'll make sure that those dimensions are also in the perspective layer so they don't show up in the top template view. So there's the top template view now, and I need to turn off the perspective layer and update that scene. Go back to the perspective scene, and I don't see, now I've got the dimensions relating to those two scenes. So I'll quit here on showing a process for making the Coopered doors.